Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rinnie. And today we're getting mindful about disability. And joining me for today's discussion, I've got Dinesh Palipana from the Gold Coast. How are you going, Dinesh?
Hey, Simon. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, I'm really excited. We're talking a bit off air about how this all came about. So I want to do a shout out to Perry Cross and Vittoria Buatava from episode 57 of the Mindful Men podcast, who put your name forward. So I'm looking forward to having a chat and hearing about, your life with disability and how it's impacted you, but also how you've thrived and not just survived through disability as well. So I'm really pumped for this episode. To give the audience a bit of a context about who you are, you've got quite the CV. So I'm going to read it out. And it's the 2021 Queensland Australian of the Year. You're a doctor, a lawyer, and I'm wondering how you do so much study, because that's a lot of study in those two areas, and a person living with a spinal cord injury as well. And to add to that, you were the first quadriplegia medical intern in Queensland and the second person with quadriplegia to graduate medical school in Australia. So quite the CV. How does that feel, just hearing back about, your life and all those accolades?
One of the things I've learned over the last 13 years in particular, after having a spinal cord injury, is that humility is the most important thing, or one of the most important things for a human being. And I mean, some of those things are very dear to my heart, in that becoming a doctor took so much blood, sweat, and tears. And there's that whole story behind it. But I think we just have to always be grounded. And I feel that I am so lucky. I was actually just reading an article this morning about how many Australians live in poverty, for example, right? So it just gives me perspective of how lucky I am, despite whatever's happened in the past. So when we talk about all those things, I just think, I've been lucky. I've had the opportunities to do this, and it gives me a responsibility to do something with it. That's what I think about when I think about those things. I think the most risky thing for a human being, or at least me anyway, is to kind of sit back and rest on the laurels.
I was keen to hear your thoughts around what disability, because we're talking about disability today. Like, what does it actually mean to you in terms of a definition or a way of being? How would you describe the word disability?
So there's so much discourse around language these days. And, we're really examining what words mean and what words are. Society, I think we're talking about words and what they mean. So I think disability generally is something that's said to be, it's not a bad thing. It's just what it is. But for me, I always wonder, I think probably the next level is just to say, you know what, we're human beings. We're human beings. We're all different. We all have different strengths. We all have different preferences. And I think as a society, we probably just need to get to that, where we take a strengths-based approach to everyone and celebrate everyone's differences and everyone's. But disability, I wonder, if we take it from a different angle, and if you think, well, am I not able to do things? I don't feel that way. I was with someone this morning who had, at a young age, was affected by retinitis pigmentosa, which affected their vision. And so the loss of vision affected both eyes. But we both reflected on whether we would ever take it back. Would I take back the spinal cord injury, and would they take back their vision? And both of our answers were no. We feel that these things happened for good. We both love our lives. We both find a great deal of happiness today. So I just wonder. I mean, I think we're probably in the future, I would hope that society just sees people for people.
Is it because you had that shared lived experience of disability that it made it feel like it was the place to be? Because I know through my journey, so mine's a mental health journey, and for the better part of my life, I'm talking 20 plus years, even longer than that, I wore the mask of mental illness. I call it the mask very well, and I hid away from the world what was actually happening. So, and then finally, when I took off that mask a few years ago, I felt like I was being my more authentic self. And then in the work that I do now as a social worker and essentially helping guys with mental health and disability challenges through a counselling approach, I find because I have that shared lived experience, it gives fuel to this passion that I have to help other guys just like me who are struggling internally and help them see the light and see their potential, see their strengths. And so I can imagine it might be very similar to you in that moment this morning.
Yeah, that is exactly true. And I had depression in my early 20s as well. And I had a panic disorder and anxiety disorder, agoraphobia. It was one of the darkest points in my life. So, yeah, I remember. And it was actually more paralyzing than the spinal cord injury was. I did the same thing. I hid away. You wear the mask, and to the outside world, you're just this. Yeah, I share that experience with you, but it was only for a short period in my life. There were probably like 3 years, 4 years, thereabouts.
Yeah. We're going to talk a lot about disability today, but I like to always step right back and hear a bit about your story before disability. And, where did you grow up? Are you from the Gold Coast or did you move to the Gold Coast? And tell us a bit about what led you to, I guess, pursue a career in medicine. And you've also got the law degree as well. So, yeah, what drew you to that as well? And then we'll come to the car accident and disability entering your life.
Well, I actually grew up in Sri Lanka until I was 10 years old. We lived through a war. We lived through a lot of, I was reading an article it was about poverty in Australia, but it also touched on the inequities in the world, right? The reason I was checking that out is because a friend and I were having a conversation, and my friend was saying that they earned $72,000 a year and that wasn't enough, but they had a brand new car, they also have food, it's a single person income. And sure, like that can be tough, but I'd thought to put that into context, when you look at Sri Lanka, where I grew up, people are living on about $1 a day. So that's what I grew up in. And we eventually left. We came to Australia. I spent a little bit of time in Sydney, then a lot in Byron Bay. Mm-hmm. That's where I spent most of my teenage years, and then Brisbane. And then when I finished high school, I got into law school, and that's when I had depression. And you asked me how I got into medicine. Well, it's actually depression, because my doctor, when I was going through depression, really inspired me to do medicine. I wonder if that's why you became a social worker.
It's interesting you say that, because I remember I was the first person in my family to go to university. And, I grew up in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. So it's a bit of a lower socioeconomic area, a lot more people that are in trades, welfare, and not many people pursuing higher education. And I remember getting towards the end of my high school and saying to myself, Simon, I want to work with people just like me. But I didn't know what mental health was at the time. So we're talking about the end of the 90s, because mental health discussions weren't a topic in northern suburbs of Adelaide during that period. And they had this massive book that this thick, an inch thick or so, and it had all the university degrees in there, but I didn't know what I was reading. Obviously, I couldn't do psychiatry or a doctor because my grades were barely, making ends meet. But then I did find social sciences, and in there I found out that I could major in psychology. But then I got to the second year, and I did the first year pretty well. I got to the second year, and the statistics component of it, and so many social workers have said this to me as well, is that's what stopped them from doing psychology. And so I ended up changing majors to anthropology, went on a big 15-year career in the public service. So that's what my career became. But it wasn't until I became a mature, I went back to study as a mature age student, say, Simon, I'm sick of the public service. I've done some amazing work in there. And the last 4 years was with the National Disability Insurance Agency, where I came into disability myself from a work perspective. Even though my mum had lived with disability all her life, she wasn't part of that system. She was too old and so forth. And I eventually got to a stage in my career where I'm like, oh, there's got to be something more to this. And I started thinking about that young version of me wanting to get into the mental health space. And so I went to the local university. They introduced me to social work. And they said, oh, by the way, you can become an accredited mental health social worker. And I'm like, awesome. Does this statistics subject exist in this thing? And they actually said, yes, it's the same statistic subject. But I think this time around, I was a bit more committed to my study, as opposed to just going for the bare minimum in my undergrad and then off to the uni bar afterwards. And so I did breeze through it, and it actually ended up being my highest grading subject of all things. But that brought on a lot of anxiety, that subject, because I remembered my bachelor's degree. I'm going, I can't do this. But I'm like, no, I can do this. It's just about mindset and studying, and I'm more committed to study this time around. And so that's what led me to social work. And I've had that exact same discussion with lots of social workers who have said that was almost their career path as well. They started trying to get into psychology, stopped at the statistics, found social work, but still did the statistics. So
wow. Well, yeah, I mean, that's really cool. And we have some amazing social workers where I work, and I think I love what they do, and I love working with the social work team. But yeah, it was actually depression that ended up getting me into medical school, because I was just inspired by my doctor and how he changed my life. Yeah. And so I finished law and got into medical school, and that was that.
Did you find it hard to talk about depression? Because it took me 20 years to open up about it. How was it like for you in talking to or going to see a doctor and recognizing that something wasn't quite right?
And this was 2003 or 4, I think, or thereabouts. I didn't know what depression was, because it's not like today, right? We talk about it a lot, but those days I don't think it was as open, and I didn't know I was depressed. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what I was going through. So I had no idea. I just went and said, look, I'm just sick. I'm not feeling well. I'm like, I just said all this stuff, and we went through the normal tests and things, and eventually said, look, I think you've got depression. And that was it.
Yeah. And did you find that, did you go to counseling? Did you get meds? Like, what was your process through the mental health journey?
I tried everything. I mean, I talked to a lot of people. I tried every single thing. And eventually I think, that there's a lot. I reckon you probably have a better analysis of this than I, perhaps. But I think depression, we have the biological component and we have that side of things. But at the same time, I always think it's also a orange light to change life and to change the direction. And when you think about it, how many people are in a miserable job that they don't want to be in? How many people in that toxic relationship they don't want to be in? And if you live in a place that they don't want to be. And I was that guy. Like, I was doing so many things that weren't really resonating with me. Yeah. And I hadn't found myself. So I think it was actually where I found myself through depression. And that's probably what really cut me loose from that.
Yeah. I can imagine like someone who gets into the medical sector talking openly around mental health as a personal experience. Is that a bit of a challenge? Because I have talked to a few of my GPs, one in particular who had experienced burnout. And then I spoke about burnout to another GP who was very much on the opposite side of the fence, saying this is not a medical thing. This is just like a workplace stress thing. But I found a real connection with the GP that had experienced it personally. And like in your circles, is personal mental health experiences as a medical professional something that has a bit of a shame and stigma associated with it?
It's hit and miss. And there are doctors that are starting to talk about it. One of my colleagues up in North Queensland, she was the Young Queensland Australian of the year last year, I think. She did a bunch of great work around mental health and medicine. The doctor he's a cardiologist, who founded Crazy Socks for Docs, and he's very open about his journey through mental health. So there are some conversations, but still the structure is probably not as good. I've had colleagues so to give you an example, I was with someone recently who was involved in a very significant injury. They've been in hospital for a long time, and they worked for a private company. And this company kept paying them, even though, they had no obligation to get this person through this process. But then I have a friend who went through depression and worked in a hospital, and they pretty much just cut my friend off very quickly. And it was a very tough process to get back into work and do all that. So I don't think we do the right thing by medical professionals who actually, like, I feel that the same thing goes for veterans. These people give their heart and soul for our community. And I don't know if we look after them as well as we should when the time is right. So in medicine too, I don't think it's quite there yet.
Very similar in the allied health professionals. I talk to a lot of psychologists and social workers, counsellors, who all say very similar, like it's hard being a therapist, but then being a therapist in therapy as well, someone also dealing with their own stuff, can be a very bit of a challenge and stigmatizing, because they don't want to voice that they have these other challenges because they feel like it might impact business. I'm one of the, I guess, a few that actually wear it as a flag and say, hey, I've got lived experience and I've been in similar shoes, not the same shoes, but similar shoes. And I kind of get what it feels like to not feel okay. And I kind of wear it as a badge, but so many struggle with that. And, for various reasons, it's quite a personal thing to go through. So, but we could talk about mental health all day, and I won't do that to you because we're actually here to talk about disability. So, tell us a bit about, life. Where did disability come into your life? How did it impact you? And how did it impact those around you as well?
I had a car accident in 2010, 31st of January 2010. And you never know, right? Like, you never know what is going to happen in life. Sometimes you don't even have a concept of it, right? I mean, just using mental health as an example, I always think, like, when it comes to mental health or disability or whatever, I think we need professionals with these experiences in all professions, because I always think it's like a pilot who's never been a passenger in an airplane. Like, how, like, I think it's the same thing. So I think we need people who've lived through that. But when I was at that point in my life, I was already a medical student, but I had no concept of what it was to have a disability. I had no concept about what it was to have a spinal cord injury. I mean, I knew little bits and pieces, but you never think about it, right? So I had no idea about the numerous things that came with the spinal cord injury. And I have an excellent support crew, including my mum. But the boys always say, man, I had no idea, like, how much there is to this. So for example, I didn't know that with the spinal cord injury, or I didn't think of the fact that I wouldn't be able to control my body temperature anymore. I didn't think of the fact that my blood pressure will drop if I eat a big meal. I didn't think of the fact that COVID-19 will be a threat. I mean, we had no idea then, right? But so there are all these physical things that I had no idea about. And then the social stuff as well, employment, housing, I mean, poverty, all that jazz. But yeah, you're right, Simon, there's a ripple effect into every single person in your life. There was a guy who's a friend now, Chris. He was at the accident site when it happened. He was just a bypass Good Samaritan who was there, and he pulled over, but it affected him. He said he thinks about that still, and it's affected him. My mom, obviously, my dad, like, they split up. Family walked away, friends walked away. It affected so many people, and it's affected so many people in a hard way. And it's one of the funniest things. I had a girl that was sort of, I don't know even how to put it, complicated, but
say no more.
yeah. I spoke to her many years later, and she said, you have no idea what that injury, what that accident did to my life, and you have no idea how it affected me. And she was very upset about it when we spoke, and angry. And I was thinking, man, like, it affected my life. But I think these things have a ripple effect on all the people around you. And I see it over and over again in people who sustain trauma. It affects everyone.
Yeah. Do you remember, like, after the car accident, like, I guess waking up or being in hospital and what the doctors were saying to you, like, in terms of the impact, or did that come later down the track?
It was very hit and miss. It's very hit and miss. I have a friend who is a very senior doctor who was recently in the hospital, and my friend was disappointed that their doctor was very dismissive of their symptoms and condition. And when you think that it happened to a senior doctor, well respected, and that was the same for me. Like I had very hit and miss experiences. I think particularly when it comes to something like a spinal cord injury or trauma, that power differential is huge, right? You have no other choice. You're in the hospital, you're at someone's mercy. And so I think we have a responsibility to try and do as, we're there for the patient and we need to do the best. But my experience was so hit and miss. There were some doctors who were great, like the one who actually came in the ambulance. But then when I was a patient in the hospital, it was very, very hit and miss.
Yeah.
In fact, I have a friend who was in a meeting, one of the meetings about me, because you have meetings and go through all your patients sometimes. And my friend said that the group of doctors said, yeah, you can forget about being a doctor. So there are even things like that happened those days.
Yeah, on that, and my next question, actually, this leads into my next question, is like, you've had the injury, you were studying to become a doctor. What was the thing that made you keep studying and then eventually get work in the field? Like a lot of people, and I guess rightly so, might just give up and say, look, I've just got to look after me. I can't keep studying. I can't keep doing whatever they're doing, whether it's work or whatever. What was the driver for you to keep going?
Yeah, and like you said, I don't think there's a right or wrong way to go about it. For me, it was just, I knew I would regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't try. I just wanted to try. I just knew that if I didn't try, I would regret it forever. I didn't want to have any regrets. Like we get one shot at life, right? I didn't want to live with regrets. And I reckon if I didn't do it, I would have been like, oh man, could I have been a doctor? Could I have done that? It was a dream. It was a dream. So I just thought I'm going to try. And I remember having this conversation with one of my closest friends. And I said, all right, man, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go and try. And he said, I don't want to hear that. Like, you're not going to try. You're going to go and kick ass. Like, You either do or not do. You're not going to try. And I will never forget that conversation. I'm like, oh, all right. Okay. I will go and do this. So that was that. So it's like Yoda said, do or don't do. There is no try.
I love it. How was uni? Like my uni up here, like the USC is where I went. And even Adelaide Uni, I went to Adelaide Uni for my undergrad. A lot of stairs, for example. So I wondered, like, how accessible was uni after it, and how did you navigate that from someone who hadn't been in the disability system to all of a sudden being in that system and trying to do their study and get through? How was that, like, that transition for you? Was it seamless? Was your university like really accessible, or did they have to do a bit of work as well?
I think there's an element of the right place and right time and luck as well. My university, they built a new medical school I think they moved into it probably 2 years before I started. So everything was flat, accessible. All they had to do, when I came in, they, at their own accord, built a automatic door, and that was it. And the hospital was brand new as well. So it was very accessible. So I was in something that was built in the 2014 or 15 or 13 or something like that. So it's brand new. I think I was really lucky because I talked to people who go to these stands. I actually spent some time in Boston as a medical student, and that hospital is old and the university is old, like from the 1700s or 1800s, I think it was. But it was very challenging to get around. But this place is perfect.
Yeah. And how did you find, like, in terms of, when we live with disability, sometimes we need a lot of equipment. And I remember the episode 57 with Perry, and he uses a lot of equipment and accessible housing and so forth. How was it for you to source the equipment? Because it sounds like this was before the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Like, how did you go finding wheelchairs and assessments and getting the right stuff for you so that you can go to university and then can go into the workforce as well?
Yeah. So it was before the NDIS, and we're going to do a little shout out for the NDIS actually, because I think it's important that we continue the scheme, that it has bipartisan support. And even if you're looking at it from a purely economical perspective, they said that every dollar you invest in the NDIS generates $2 for the economy. It's jobs, it's equipment, it's all this stuff. So there was that industry that we've now built was not in place when I was going through. And it was hard. It was repairs. Sometimes they just take the wheelchair away and not let me know when it was going to come back. And I'd have to wait a week or two. I'm like, dude, they're my legs. How do I get around? So there are bits and pieces and equipment that you need. The main thing being the wheelchair, but there's a lot of other stuff underneath the hood.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly become a lot easier to get these things now because there are more providers and there are more options for purchasing this stuff. So it's definitely changed a lot from since when I first had the accident. And I think someone like Perry, who's had his injury a lot longer than mine, he could probably tell even more stories about what that looked like before then.
Yeah, he was definitely trying to tell me a lot of stories around housing and, having to go up at an old Queenslander to get up, someone help him carry him essentially. Like, has that changed for you as well in terms of accessible housing, accessible cars and stuff like that? Has that changed your world as well?
Yeah, accessible housing. I mean, I recently just got myself into an accessible home and it's just cool. The coolest thing about my new place is that there's an accessible table where I can sit with everyone and have dinner comfortably. Yeah. So most tables are not at the right height, whether it be at a restaurant or something. So it's at the perfect height where I can just spend time with friends and family, because having a meal together is such an important part of life. So even things like that is really, really good. And cars, I actually love cars. I love cars even before the accident. I've always really loved cars, and luckily I'm able to get in and out of most cars, just slide in from the wheelchair using a slide board and a bit of help. So that's been pretty cool. It's just about making sure that the car can fit the wheelchair and have a few things like that. But when it comes to cars, I think parking is the funny thing. So a lot of people, when they see me, not a lot, but some have not believed that I had a spinal cord injury. There's sometimes been abuse. There's sometimes been people have let down my tires. Yeah, so there's been stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, by and large, people are pretty good.
How did that make you feel, like, in terms of the abuse and people letting your tires down and so forth? Like, what was that like as an impact on you personally?
I think one of the things that I need to improve on is probably to manage those, because I do get angry, and I think it becomes a process where it can be, I want to look at strategies where I can deal with that a bit better. So I think anger and all this kind of stuff, I think now in the world, we need kindness more than ever, right? So I do get angry when those things happen, but I've also realized on reflection that then it just tends to consume you for at least a couple of hours sometimes, or even minutes. And is that really worth ruminating on when you have so many more beautiful moments in this world? Yeah. So maybe we can talk about that offline, Simon, about healthy strategies.
I'll book you in for a free session.
Yeah.
And it can impact us, because, when we're living our day to day and someone who doesn't know us, puts stuff on us, or for whatever reason, it can really does impact us. And I think part of what I love about the NDIS is it builds this community. It's building community around people living with disability, whether it's support workers, whether it's programs, whether it's therapy, whether it's assistive technology and housing and so forth. And so I think I loved how you did a shout out to the NDIS, because I think it really has done some amazing things for people. And I've, in my former job, when I worked at the NDIA, I was a planner. So I had hundreds of planning conversations with people with disability and their families and their carers, talking about how can we use the scheme to help them live the life that they want to live, not the life that they have to live. And I think the more we can get into our discourse around, and we were talking about language earlier, around that disability is just another part of society and part of who we are. It's not something to degrade people about or to let their ties down and so forth, because it does impact, all of us. It impacts you. It makes you angry because someone's having a go at you about parking where you're allowed to park, or letting your tires down. That's stuff from the 70s, 80s. Let's leave that there and move on. And we can, I think, conversations like this help with moving on and promoting disability as a thing that we live with, and the economies around that as well. There's a lot of people out there doing good in this space. And I think the more we can promote that is essentially why I do the podcast, to promote the diversity of Australian culture and culture around the world, because I talk about with, these kind of conversations with people globally as well. So in that sense, thank you for sharing that, because I'm, even though I'm not glad that it impacted you, I'm glad that you talked about it. Now, I'd love to talk about, disability in the workplace as well, because you're doing amazing things. Are you in the emergency department? I was watching a video of you earlier with Kurt Fernley, and you were talking about, working in the emergency department. And when you said about that doctor who said, you can just say goodbye to your medical career, I'd love to hear about your experiences of going into the workplace with disability, particularly the medical profession, and how you found that. Has it been an easy thing to do? Are you still finding accessibility issues? But also, what's the impact on some of the patients that you see as well, and the interactions that you have with them?
Yeah, I had mixed opinions at the start. So some people said there is no way, like, how are you going to do your job? How are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? And then some were like, no, we need to try. This is cool. This is awesome. We're trying new things. And then there was even comments about, I think the patient thing is really interesting, because someone said the patients will never take you seriously. And I love saying this thing, but it's been 7 years now since I've been a doctor, and I've seen thousands of patients. Not one has ever said anything like, can you do your job? Can you do this? Not one. They might have thought it, I don't know, but not one has ever really said it. And they've been amazing. Like, the patients have been the best part. When I go to work and talk to the patients, I always think, man, this is why I do this. This is cool. And our conversations have been great. Our relationships have been great. It's just been amazing. So I'm very grateful to the patients. They've been very good. But yeah, I mean, it's also made us think differently about what medicine is, because it's something that's so steeped in tradition, but we figured out different ways to do things, like different ways to approach a patient physically, and different ways to write notes, like using voice recognition, for example, different technology, and I've just become more efficient than the standard way of doing things in medicine. So it's had that benefit there as well. But I think, talking broadly about the workplace, it's brought about this conversation that we kind of tailor people to be the lowest common denominator, right? Like, here is a social worker, or here is a doctor, and we package this person up and say, because you need to be able to do all this stuff, you're now a social worker, and this is what we present to society. And I think, okay, we probably, if we can't physically do something, we may need to understand why that's done or how it's done and all that stuff. But I think when we tailor jobs for people, whether they have a disability or not, we need to tailor it for everyone, right? Do we actually need to be able to do everything? No, we don't. Does a pilot need to be able to fly every single aircraft? They probably shouldn't. It's probably dangerous, right? Yeah. But it's the same with, I think, what you and I do as well. Do we need to be able to do every single thing? We don't. And so I always think, in medicine, there are things that I can do, and I just try to do them as best as I can, and try to be there for what we're actually there for, which is the patient. So I think the skepticism has become less and less and less over time, but there is still the occasional pain in the butt.
And you were talking about doing all the things, and I'm interested from your perspective. We've come out of COVID now, and there's still little waves happening. But how did that impact you working in the hospital environment as well? Because just for anybody, that was really taxing. You're hearing a lot of burnout stories as well. Doing long, double, triple shifts. How did that impact you?
I thought it was our time to rise, and I felt very fortunate and privileged to be a doctor at that time. I wanted to keep working and contributing as much as I could, and it was scary though. It was, knowing my situation, but you can't back down when it matters the most. So yeah, just just kept going. But definitely there was fear, I suppose. But yeah, you just have to keep going, I think.
Yeah. It was such a testing time. And I remember at the time I was working in the NDIA and we went into work from home, and then a lot of the supports for in the NDIS basically stopped because support workers couldn't go out to people's houses, or people couldn't access aged care facilities or even hospitals for certain circumstances. And almost like the industry came to a stop in a lot of cases, and plans weren't getting utilised to their fullest degree. And a lot of people, there was also a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear. What happens if I contract COVID, or if I pass it on unknowingly to someone living with disability? Because they also increased the level of, I guess, restrictions on accessing people with disability in terms of their homes and so forth as well. Did you see much in that area as well? Did you have many people with disability affected by COVID in your circles or coming into the hospital?
Lots. I mean, I was affected by it because, all these things changed. So, I was affected by it. But, I know a lot of people, and it still is a struggle for so many people with disability, even when we talk about vaccinations, and there's just no clear guidance on treatment. When I got COVID, there's a huge lack of clarity about what I was eligible for, this me being a doctor. So I didn't actually get any antivirals or anything like that at the time. Then around the world outside of Australia, there were conversations about healthcare rationing and withholding ventilators and all this jazz. It was a really scary, tough time for people with disability. Yeah.
I can imagine also for the hospitals, preparing for the whole hospital to be full. I remember seeing Anastasia Palaszczuk's, almost daily updates around hospital wards getting, quarantined and so forth. What was it like at your hospital? Were you guys really prepared, or were you just worrying for the future? Or how did you navigate that?
I think people were understandably worried about the situation. There was a lot of preparation work. There was a lot of resources were mobilized. A lot of work was done. A lot of effort was made, and people really stood to the challenge. So there was a lot of work that went into making sure that everything was done. And I was actually lucky enough to spend a couple of months working with the medical leadership during that time. And I worked with a really inspirational person. Her name's Dr. Kelly Wren. And she taught me a lot about that top level management of a crisis like this, which was really cool, but they did an amazing job.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I want to extend past the hospital work, and I notice on your CV, another thing to add is that you were doctor of Gold Coast Titans physical disability rugby league team. Are you still the doctor there, or?
Yeah, well, I saw this on the news somewhere that they had a disability team. I just reached out and said, man, this is so cool. Can I help in some way? So that's how I got involved. And I'm still involved, and they're just such a passionate bunch of people. And I love the work that they're doing because sport's so important, right? And so I think particularly in Australia, because sport is part of Australian culture, and I think we need to get disability into mainstream conversations like that. So sport is a great way, and that's why I love the work that the Titans do. And recently we've seen disability in fashion, disability in the media, disability in all these things. So that's why I think it's a really valuable bit of work, because then it becomes mainstream, that visibility is important. And because I think one day the goal is we just see human beings and not any of these labels, and everyone's just celebrated. But I think these are the things that will get us there.
Yeah. I remember, I think it was the London Olympics or one of the last few Olympics. I can't remember exactly, where the television had Paralympics and, able-bodied Olympics, if you can call it that, kind of meshed in together. And you were seeing all the television as well. I think Kurt Fernley was part of the commentary team from memory. Don't quote me on that. But I just loved it. I loved seeing that and integrating that. I thought it was so cool because it opened up, I guess, the community to so many different variations of sport as well, because sport is part of our culture and our psyche. One question, are you a rugby fan in the first place, and have you played a game?
I've never played. I mean, you toss the ball around and dabble, but I've never played. But yeah, actually a lot of the friends, and particularly in Gold Coast, there's a lot of people that were into rugby, so I was getting into it anyway, and a lot of the people around me. So yeah, that's really how I got into it.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. So you're also an author of the book Stronger, How Losing Everything Set Me Free. And I'm interested to hear why you felt the need to put pen to paper and tell your story.
I actually never had the intention of doing that, but there were people around me that were good friends that said, man, you should write a book, and there was particularly one who said, I don't read. I don't like to read. But if you wrote a book, I will read it. Then it just happened through a series of events. I just met a guy who's now a friend who is an author. He encouraged me to write a book. And then I met randomly the author, Jamila Rizvi, who actually brought this to life with me. So it's through a series of chance meetings and sliding door moments and just kind people that encouraged me to do it in my life. And that's how it came to life. And I'm still blown away because I'll go to the airport and see it on a shelf, or like I'll be at a bookstore. I'm like, oh man, that's still so cool. All this is still very cool to me. And the writing process, this desk that I'm talking to you from, it's a desk that has seen a lot because it's a desk that I used to go through medical school and study. It's a desk that's now sitting on my desk at the very same university. And it's a desk that I wrote the book from as well. So this is the very desk that all this happened.
Well, did telling your story and writing your story, did it bring up a lot of mixed emotions, or was it something that was more of a positive experience for you?
Yeah, I think it was more like, I just can't believe all this stuff happened. It was more like that. I'm like, geez, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe that happened. I just felt like I've lived several lifetimes by the end of it. But I don't think I particularly got emotional doing that. Maybe it's because I've dealt with all that stuff. I don't know. Like, I don't know why. But with a lot of memories from the past, I don't really feel emotional about any of it, including the accident. It just feels like things that have happened, and it's just like just memories. So I was just more like, I just cannot believe the volume of things that have happened.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot for anyone to go through. The word that keeps coming up to my mind as we're talking is just thriving, not just surviving. And you certainly paint that picture in the way that you speak and in what you've done and what I've seen about you online as well. So it is. I'm thankful that you're open and honest and sharing your story, because it gives so much inspiration to people out there, whether or not they live with disability or not. Just hearing the story and how you've overcome things like adversity and achieved what you've achieved.
I really love this haiku, which says, my barn having burnt down, I can now see the moon. So I think that's what happened. Like, my barn burnt down a couple of times in my life. And then I could see the moon. And I feel, having lived in Sri Lanka, meeting all the people in my life, I just feel so, so, so very lucky. And I feel that I want to make the most of life, and I want to push the limits. I want to see what I'm capable of, but also demonstrate that actually we're unlimited as human beings.
I love that. And thinking about your journey and everything you have gone through, I was hoping you could imagine yourself when you've just had the car accident. So knowing everything you know now, what would you love to tell yourself, your younger self, about what, whether it's in the days, the months, or even years after the car accident? What would you love to tell your younger self?
I'd say just keep going, man. Like, just keep going. If I changed anything back then, we wouldn't be here right now having this conversation, right? So I'd just say keep going. Keep going. You are so good looking. Damn.
I wasn't going to say anything. Yeah.
No, I just say just keep going, stay the course. I just say that things will get better, but you just got to keep going.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Nice and simple. Simple is often the best strategy, I guess, when you're trying to G yourself up, and can make things a bit too complicated sometimes. But Dinesh, a couple more questions and I'll let you go, because I understand you are a very busy man by your CV. First of all, where can people follow you if they wanted to learn more about you or see what you do? I know you're on the socials. Where's the best place for people to find you?
Yeah, Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn. So shout out anytime. Always love a chat. Just Google as well, I think, pulls up a few things.
Good things. Only good things. I'll put the links into the show notes so people can access that readily. And the last question I ask every single guest is to plug something that makes you feel good. Now, this is a bit of a pay it forward thing, so that maybe a listener out there is wants to tune into what you're listening to or watching on TV or a book you've read or something that you feel good. It could be even self-care or a mantra, whatever it is. Yeah, what's something that you can plug that makes you feel good?
Happiness is about giving. Happiness not about what we can take. It's about what we can do to make the world better. So one of the organizations that I'm supporting at the moment is the Best Life Foundation. So look up Best Life Foundation. And it's really about giving young people with a disability a chance at an independent and successful life. So please, if you get a minute, just look them up and support their work.
Love it. Wonderful. Thanks so much. And Dinesh, again, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story and all the wonderful work you are doing and your vulnerability as well, sharing your mental health journey and then disability journey. It's really important, I think, to inspire our community both to look at disability in a new light, but also people living with disability, if they might be struggling, to hear your voice and see what you've done and maybe give them some inspiration to keep pushing forward and keep going as well. So thank you so much.
Simon, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.